Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Think Tank number 6, Innovation in Insurance. It's great to have you all here today. Insurance is rarely a subject that is addressed when we talk about urban air mobility, and it's mostly seen as an operative part of the operation. But it turns out that it may very well be very instrumental for what is arguably the holy grail of urban air mobility, and that is public acceptance. Public acceptance, in general, it not only refers to the eventual potential customers that we may have as users for our air taxi operations, but it involves a much broader spectrum, like, for example, acceptance by aeronautics authorities, acceptance from city authorities, local governments, and general governments as well. And as we strive to shape the future of our cities, it is very important that we tackle acceptance in the best way possible to achieve being able to implement our systems. So today we have a great panel where we're trying to tackle these very interesting points about the innovation that we need to approach in insurance. My name is Felipe Varon. I am the founder and CEO of Varon Vehicles. And I want to introduce our panel today, starting with Alejandro Olier. He is the mobility portfolio manager for SURA, insurance company from Colombia. He is responsible for leading the design and development of the product and solutions portfolio of insurance for mobility in the country. Lorena Rios, she's the director of mobility solutions for Suramericana in the Latin American region. She's responsible for leading transformation of the auto insurance business in the 9 countries they cover towards a broad coverage in mobility. Jerry Hammond, the executive officer and founder of Canadian Air Mobility based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, as well as the executive director of CAM, the not-for-profit Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Consortium. CAM is spearheading the efforts in organizing, strategizing, and executing the advanced air mobility ecosystem to bring the next frontier of zero-emission aviation to Canada. Joining us as well is Claude Bessudo, president of Colombian travel agency Aviatur, and president of the board of directors of the Colombian Association of Travel and Tourism, ANATO, specializes in strategic improvisation, has been chosen as the best manager of the country by Portfolio, La República Diary, and El Rosario University. Frequent lecturer in the main universities of Colombia, chambers of commerce, and companies. He's been a sculpture model in the Royal Academy of Fine Arts of Brussels and a waiter in New York. And joining us as well is Andrew Carter. Andrew has been integrating drones into the United States national airspace since 2008, and he's a co-founder, president, and CTO of Resilience. With us as well is Adriana Varon, CFO of Varon Vehicles. Please note that this session is being recorded, and it will be posted in the Skyscraper webpage, varonvehicles.com/skyscraper. So you can revisit this session and all other previous think tanks at any time. To our attendees, you're able to submit your questions through the questions and answers button on the bottom of your screen. And at the end, we will have an 8-minute slot in which we'll try to answer as many questions as possible between all panelists. Please note that the language of this think tank is English, but we have live interpretation both in English and Spanish. So you just have to go to the interpretation button on the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred language to listen to live interpretation of this session in your language of choice. So welcome everybody, and let's launch this discussion today by talking about what our views are of the new insurance products and services that we see that are required for urban air mobility. In general, of course, urban air mobility is a new way of transportation. It's an extension of and a merger of aviation and urban mobility, and probably the automotive industry as well. So why don't we start discussing what our thoughts are around what these new services, what these new these new products that we need to create are from our perspective here. So why don't we get started with Andrew? Let's go backwards as we've done in our previous think tanks. From the technical perspective that you work in your company, developing health monitoring of systems, how does that impact the insurance aspect of the operation?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me today. What we're really looking at is more of, how do you assure the safety of the ecosystem? And that plays directly into the insurance, because the insurance is basically, somebody underwriting that safety is there, which again plays into your public acceptance of the public wants to understand that somebody has underwritten this safety element, and that there's something somewhere that has said that it's safe, put their stamp of approval on it, and that they don't have to worry about the things buzzing over their head. So we backtrack that down to the technology level, and what we provide is, or what we look at is, how do we assure the safety of that ecosystem? How do we monitor the health and integrity of the data and the systems that make up the ecosystem? And with the service providers that are providing these services to the air platforms, themselves, to the vertiports that need to be operational and running and not congested or have landing pads available. How do we make sure all of that's running smoothly? And again, it really all gets back to safety. We need to assure and ensure the safety of this ecosystem, and develop the technology, the architecture, and the processes around that. And I think insurance is a big one, because insurance is really going to drive some of the technology. If you you develop something and you want someone to use it for a safety critical application, you're likely going to need to have insurance based on that. And that insurance underwriter isn't going to come in unless you can prove in some way that system is going to be operating. It's going to be operating to your performance requirements. It's going to be operating with a high availability and uptime. And that's the areas that we're looking into at Resilience, and what we think is going to be required for this industry to really take off.
Absolutely, that's a very, very important point, because it's not about just about safety itself, like you will say, but it's also about the perception of safety, and that's a critical point to this discussion today. The perception that regulators have, people have, communities have. So let's turn it over to Alejandro. Let's go flipping over back and forth. Alejandro, you are an insurance company. You are developing the innovation in the insurance products at SURA. So why don't you tell us your perspective on those new products, those new services, and how you feel that an insurance company and an insurance partner like yourself can be instrumental to achieve public acceptance.
Thank you very much, Felipe. And I think that it is very important to connect that there are many different stakeholders that enable this type of trust. As it has been mentioned, this sensation and this perception of safety around this type of service. We speak about something that would seem like science fiction under the common view, to think that an aircraft could be floating over us, but we start with something that already exists in our industry. What I'm saying is that the insurance industry, in this case, can participate in important fashion by starting to design this type of products that in a way already exist, such as civil liability. I mean, all of the society where damage could be caused during the route and by each one of the different stakeholders that are engaged. Also, the protection of the system itself, the infrastructure, considering all of the technical aspects that are around it, from the specialty, each one of the routes, the infrastructure of the very ports. It is also very important, as you said, the trust that within the community, not just the users who are the ones that might be directly exposed, but also all of those that would be living around where the infrastructure is located, need to be invited to participate in this basis for insurance, because it is them that who could also be involved eventually. Let's not only think about it from the negative standpoint, but on the physical and social development that takes place on each of these beds. So insurance products, from the protection of the users, the provider, as well as the different communities that are part and are around, are a fundamental part for the development of new products that as an insurance company we should also be aiming to as well.
Great point. Why don't we turn it over to Jean-Claude? You, of course, are a very experienced company and person on the tourism, and you have the points about experience with helicopter operation, and that it's instrumental to leveraging the entrance of the new urban air mobility. So I wanted to give us your perspective on this. Over to you, Jean-Claude.
I believe that the insurance and insurance components is the easiest one of everything you're doing: authorization of routes, definitions, operation areas, aviation permits, etc. I mean, a certified vehicle by the FAA, by the international authorities, becomes just a day-to-day issue for an insurance company with, I mean, once it's not an experimental vehicle anymore, with all of the experience that there is around the world with helicopters, airplanes, even aircrafts that have vertical takeoff conversion, or helicopters that take off vertically and that at some point become vehicles of a horizontal flight. So I believe that the easiest part of what you're doing is the insurance side. That's how I see it anyways.
All right, very good. Lorena, why don't you give us your perspective? And of course, let's add here to the conversation the fact that urban air mobility, of course, intends to occupy many more spaces than traditional helicopters. It intends to produce a higher volume of movements over the city, requiring a large number of vertiports and probably a large number of vehicles as well. So Lorena, over to you.
Hello, thank you very much once again for the invitation. And yes, I believe that in this insurance matter overall, but in this particular case, we need to have a very broad view and try to see beyond the traditional role or the traditional approach that has been provided. We all know that historically insurance have played and will play an important role on enabling the development of new industries and new businesses. I believe that the insurance companies have a connotation that is not too close to people. For us is clear, and it turns out that the evident part of the insurance should play an assisting role for this industry, the urban air mobility, the OEMs, the operators, the ports, all of the infrastructure that is generated around this, and that most likely will be coverage that is very close to what we do when we insure any type of artifact or system. The other perspective that we believe needs to be provided to this, and this is part of what we've been working in our business development, is not to lose sight that at the end of the day, those that are going to be hopping in these aircrafts are people like us, like all of us that are here connected today, and that part of generating this trust and the role that the insurance company should play should be linked to the uncertainties that these people feel, and that these uncertainties usually also are in the side of knowledge in the industry. The industry has all of the knowledge, and Andrew said an expert like him and his company dedicated to look out after that safety, but perhaps people, the consumers on their day-to-day, don't have the same certainty. And here we see that an important role is for us, not only in terms of the risk, when unfortunately they do happen, if it happens, not only provide peace of mind to say that we're there when that happens, but for us also, we see ourselves and we project ourselves as a way to approach the knowledge for new technologies.
Absolutely great. JR, over to you. JR, you're leading the urban air mobility ecosystem in Canada, and you do have experience in the operation of helicopters. And just like urban air mobility stands on the shoulders of the drone industry, and we've seen how insurance has matured in the drone industry so much. Of course, we're expecting that to permeate into urban air mobility now that we're talking about manned vehicles, and that together with the experience from traditional helicopters in mobility in Canada, how do you see this aspect of our operations being instrumental or not to achieve acceptance from all these players? Over to you.
That's an excellent question, Felipe. Y gracias a Felipe, Adriana, y todo el equipo de Varon. Buenos días de Vancouver. Good morning, everyone from Vancouver. A pleasure to have the opportunity to continue to link the conversations between us here in Canada and, of course, the incredible work going on in Colombia and the rest of South America. You bring up an excellent point, Felipe, on really understanding, as Lorena was explaining as well, that approximation of where we need to get to in the next stage for, yes, the urban air mobility, but where we are trying to expand it as well is on that advanced air mobility umbrella that includes, yes, the urban aspect, but critically as well, the regional side. And the key point that I want to bring out of there is that data aspect. We're very privileged on the Vancouver side with one of the largest scheduled helicopter providers on the planet, Helijet, being based in downtown Vancouver in conjunction with our float plane operators that have been giving and leaning into 38 years plus of data that we can start mining and adapting in developing these new products that can play into this advanced air mobility space. And that in conjunction gives us a starting point to build upon for, yes, the introduction of new technologies, new infrastructure opportunities, and ensuring that that safety standard we have within the aviation industry is not only maintained, but with a goal to continue to improve upon there.
Absolutely, and the data part of it is critical as we mature in technologies and implement ever more autonomous systems into the operation of our cities as well. We are going to be relying more and more on those data aspects of our operations. So how does anybody have any thoughts on how that is going to impact the insurance aspect of the operation, the data side, the data density and the automation in the operation of our air vehicles? Probably somebody from SURA. Alejandro, over to you.
Gracias, Felipe. Nada menos estaba aquí pensando que hablar de infraestructura tendemos por lo general
in terms of infrastructure, we usually tend to link it to the physical side, which clearly has been addressed here, and we have stated the importance. However, we know that this will not just be a system of access, of just transaction, getting there and buying the ticket. This is within an ecosystem where reading the routes of the people, their habits, the way they consume other services as well, that connect with the very ports. I mean, let's call it the last mile, that is as important as being able to know the mobility of the customer. And that's where we are in a world where we know that this information is sensitive, and as a company or as an ecosystem, we will know every detail of where the customer is going to and from. This will open an important door, and it has been mentioned within the infrastructure of a city we can have timely services, but on the other hand, it is a call to protect that data, to see how the customer is willing not only to share it, but also afterwards we can transform it in an insurance product. So this is where, and Lore was just talking about this, it is important to recognize that the customer mobility takes place, in this case, online, digital, and we need to be there as well so that the insurance is not interrupted at some point, whether because the data was not used correctly or because the information used at the moment of them having access will open opportunities that will also become value generation. So I think it's one of the primary sources, and insurance should assist in that perspective.
Anybody want to jump in? Andrew?
Yeah, I got something on that. I think one element there that is an interesting thing for me to think about on the insurance side is that, as you mentioned, there's a lot of data and there's an ecosystem. This data is being passed around through various entities Some architectures are a little bit more federated, where each entity kind of owns their own piece. Some are a little bit more centralized, where maybe an air navigation service provider, an ANSP, has that kind of a central hold of it. But in general, the insurance part of it is, where is the line for liability drawn? Right? You have data coming into various pieces from other pieces, and if that data is bad and causes a problem, who's liable, right? If how do you do the event reconstruction and the back tracing when a problem occurs, which is the business of insurance. When everything's going right, insurance doesn't have a lot to do. But when something actually does happen, how do you figure out who's at fault? And if a sensor, some IoT sensor on a building put out bad data which got into the ecosystem, and 6 steps down the line you have a drone or vehicle crash. How does that liability, and then how does that affect the insurance of how highly I need to assure my little IoT sensor, or what steps down the line do I need to validate that data that's coming from that little, cheaper piece of equipment?
Exactly. It's because there's so many players that converge in urban air mobility that makes that complexity that Andrew's talking about very, very apparent. Who wants to comment on these points, please? Anybody else? JR?
I'll just build upon that, and that's a great point on really what we're trying to focus on is bringing together those different parts to create an ecosystem that understands the massive amount of incoming data and also output data as well. And the critical part behind all the complexities that will come through advanced air mobility is we're trying to focus on not creating everything from brand new, but leveraging those existing platforms within the aviation space, within our massive electric vehicle space, autonomous vehicle space, and try and build upon those platforms, applying to, yes, the aviation sector, but really streamlining efforts and optimizing for, yes, the insurance providers, the regulators, the city officials, on reducing that gap that they need to take on this new technological innovation, and showcasing that there's existing work already in place on powerful new innovative platforms that we can build upon and leverage, rather than trying to create this island of a technology that doesn't link into our systems.
Perfect. And I'd like us to dig into those specifics on the actual operation. Before we jump in there, I want to remind our attendees that you guys are welcome to submit your questions through the questions and answers button on the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to answer as many of those as possible among all the panelists today. We have a few probably coming in already. The topic we want to get into first is the operative part of it, the operation of urban air mobility. Let's talk about the coverages that we know that we're going to need to have for the operation. So there we have a number of assets that include the air vehicles that they're going to need to be insured, where we have, of course, the vertiports and all the subsystems that are inside a vertiport. That includes energy assets, that includes real estate, and of course, operation systems for the urban air mobility operation. We have then the operators, the people operating the vehicles on board the vehicles. They're going to need to have a specific insurance. They're not going to be pilots from traditional aviation, very probably. They're not going to be street truck drivers either. They're going to need to be a very specific new type of operators with a specific training. Now, they're going to need to have their coverage, life insurance, etc. And then we'll have the users, right? The people who actually board the vehicles and use either the TNC service and through them, our systems in urban air mobility. So what do we see there in the coverage of our operation, guys? Let's jump it over to Jean-Claude. I mean, you are well experienced on the tourism side and assets operation. So over to you, Jean-Claude.
Because of the lack of experience, being that we are insurance brokers and we have people that are specialized on this matter that make your life much easier. So I'm going to say something foolish, I guess, but the easiest part of all of it is the insurance part, for the facilities, for the operation, for the civil liability, machinery, hangars, fires, everything that might actually happen, everything that is foreseen that it could happen. That everything that requires an insurance company, I believe that as far as aviation goes, with what we already have, I don't see any difficulties personally to being able to achieve everything that is required by you. I mean, these operations, the vehicle is an electric vehicle or combustion engine. It is just basically a minor detail as long as you have the certifications that are necessary.
Well, why don't we send it over to somebody from SURA? Any opinions there?
Yes, I do have an opinion, and I do agree with him that the insurance part, from the instrumental standpoint of the devices, the vehicles, and the infrastructure, I'm not going to say it's simple because there is a specific lack of knowledge around this particular type of vehicles, but is within the trajectory of what we've traditionally done. We are absolutely sure that the role of insurance that we shall and we can provide has to go beyond, because it has to transcend this pillar of just taking on risk that are somewhat catastrophic, what we call as financing, and our other great strategic pillar that we call management. There are a lot of tools actually that we can make available in order to bring this end user or the communities that are around to have a level of acceptance about this new type of technology. I'm just going to give you an example, a current example. The electric vehicles nowadays are not totally adopted, so to speak, but they have a learning curve already, and they're part of our day-to-day in many of our cities. And approaching the insurance of this type of vehicles from the first early moments raises questions about technical and technologically, what does that mean? What is the battery about? What do we need to learn in order to cover it? But we've learned that the adoption of people for that type of mobility goes beyond the fact that an insurance company can take a stand and say, "No worries that if your battery is damaged or fails, we are going to pay for it." There are a lot more uncertainties on our day-to-day, not knowing, for instance, that when they see only one level, one um, charge signal, one bar, how long it's going to last. And there are many more questions that people have that inhibits them in order to approach this type of mobility and adopt it. And we feel that our offer and our role as an insurance company, beyond being within that negative realm, that when the loss took place, we're there assuring people how things can happen in a positive way.
I'd like to throw something out there for the insurance people on this topic. So when we're talking about I'll say the framework for the insurance kind of already exists. One problem that we've seen on our side is that the data doesn't exist to fit into that framework. There's largely very few beyond visual line of sight operations for unmanned systems occurring in the world. You look at a company like maybe Zipline as one of the few that's doing it on a regular basis. No operations like that carrying people or really doing anything of a larger size, or very few. So when you talk about the framework existing, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you fill the framework with the data needed to actually drive the insurance, rates, policies, everything needed to come up with that package on the insurer side.
question there for the SURA guys.
Si quieres, y Lore también me complementa. Yo creo
I
que
can start, and
es
Lore can
algo
also
asociado
elaborate on
intrínseco a la
this. I
industria
think this is
aseguradora y
something
qué bueno la pregunta.
linked that is intrinsic to
Y en
the
este caso se
insurance
hace porque creo que
industry, and it's a
los
great
riesgos
question
de alguna
because I
manera
believe that
conocidos
the
los podemos
risk,
dar por
the
hecho que
known risk,
al
we
ser ya
can
conocidos pues ya
settle
traían
that being
consigo también o
known,
una historia
they
o
already
entendíamos
bring
de dónde ir
either
nosotros
some
de alguna
history
manera
or we had a
para confiarnos,
benchmark
pero
to
parte de lo que,
work
y
on.
ahorita
But
lo mencionaba, yo creo que el
part of
rol de la
it,
aseguradora, sobre todo
and
como
Lore
estando
mentioned that the
transformándose
role
desde,
of the
desde una visión de
insurance
esperar a que
company,
pase para
instead
involucrarse,
of going
ha sido
some
en
going for some
proactivamente
wait for
buscar
something to
esos riesgos,
happen, so it
esas
was about
incertidumbres, aun
proactively
cuando hoy no estén de
finding
alguna
this
manera tan
risk and the
latentes o
uncertainties when
presentes,
they're not
para
evident
identificar ahora
today,
sí, en este
in order
caso,
to start
cómo medirlos.
identifying, in this case, how to
Ojos
measure
y
them.
sin ánimos de decir que
And
mucho menos la
without
receta
the
está
spirit of
100%
saying that the
resuelta,
recipe is
está
100%
parte desde
solved,
una base siempre del si yo
we
no tengo
always start
esto, ¿qué
with the base that
sistema
if I don't
uno
have this,
similar,
what
bajo
is a
qué
similar
sistema, qué
system that I
hipótesis
can
y
go
supuestos
to?
entonces debo
Under
partir,
what system and
bajo qué tipo de
hypothesis and assumptions
consideraciones,
I need
posiblemente
to
habrá
start under
pilotos,
what type of
posiblemente habrá
considerations. There might be some pilot tests, there
escenarios sobre los
might
cuales yo
be
puedo arrancar
some
bajo uno y lo
different
puedo ir cuidando poco a
scenarios
poco,
where
pero
I
bajo
can
uno
start with
estándar
an
a
minimum
empezar a
viable
acompañar.
product or a minimum
Ahí ya no estoy
standard,
hablando de
start
protocolo tipo
assisting.
ciertas
And this is
coberturas, que si
within
bien
another
no
type
tenemos
of
la historia
circumstances, other
específica de,
coverages that,
de acuerdo, aquí
well,
vehículos
if we don't
autónomos
have the specific
aéreos, sí tenemos la historia cercana de otro tipo de
history
artefactos
of
que, dado el
autonomous
tipo de impacto que pueden generar, nos
air
sirven como
vehicles, we have
escenarios para, en
others
este
that,
caso,
given the type
calcular
of impact that they
severidades, por
might
ejemplo,
generate, to
y posiblemente para
help
otro
us
tipo de
calculate
circunstancias de
severity and
cierta
other
frecuencia,
type
que
of
son las
circumstances
variables, llamémoslas así,
with
pues para
certain
efectos
frequency.
prácticos de
That these are the
cálculo
two main variables
de
for
seguridad y
calculating
frecuencia.
the
Entonces,
insurance
creo yo,
premium,
nuestro
which
gran
is
desafío está en cómo
safety
alimentamos
and
bajo
frequency, or
los
severity and
riesgos
frequency. So
conocidos
our
la
thing
data
is,
de
how
sistemas
can we,
posiblemente
unknown
similares bajo las
systems, can
circunstancias de
feed the
hipótesis
data
historias
with the
y
similar
claramente eso
situations and valid
vamos y
hypotheses,
debemos
and
empezar a construir
clearly we
historia
need to start
en la medida
building
en
the
la que
history.
entonces
As
se pongan en funcionamiento cada uno de estos artefactos, debemos
we
ahora sí
can start
empezar a generar
operating these
bajo
devices,
su
we
propia
will then
dinámica la
start
información para
feeding
los
under their
seguros.
own
Y en
dynamics the
dónde está el
information for the
elemento entonces
insurance.
adicional, en lo que
So
tal
what is
vez
the
no es
additional
visible y
element,
lo que
perhaps
mencionó
what's
como
not
ahorita por ejemplo a los
visible? And
datos
what
y
we
creo haber
mentioned
visto
that
algunos de
was
los
linked to the
comentarios como el
data, and I
blockchain.
thought I saw
Eso
in the
también nos
comments the
permite en muchos
blockchain
escenarios
that
conseguir una
allows in
data
many different
no corrupta
scenarios to
o
find
no
non-corrupted data or
interfiera por parte de entes
non-tampered
externos que
data,
aseguren una
but
mejor calidad
external entities
y
that will
gracias a esa
assure a
mejor
better
calidad
quality. And
poder
thanks to
empezar
that better
igualmente a
quality of
nutrir mucho
data, we
más
can start
rápidamente los sistemas
feeding
necesarios para poder
faster the
estar también hacia la
necessary
calidad
systems to
de lo que
reinforce
estuviéramos
the
tarifando o
quality of what
estructurando
we
como cobertura de
are
seguro. No
establishing
sé
as an
si
insurance
adicional
policy or
haya pues
coverage. And I
como,
don't
como
know
algo,
if
Lore, que veas que
additionally,
pudiéramos aportar
Lore,
en ese
there's
sentido.
something else that you could see
Estoy
we can
completamente de
talk
acuerdo con lo
about
que
in
dice
that extent. I
Alejo.
agree with what Alejo
Yo
is
creo
saying
que
totally.
ahí es
I
más un cambio de
believe that it
mirada,
is
un
more
cambio de mirada que
about
tradicionalmente la
change of
industria no ha
mindset,
tenido y es
change of mindset
la
that the industry
aproximación
has not
así
have,
como cuando
and the
haya
approach
una
has
diferencia
been
y una
when there
historia,
is an
yo
experience or a
puedo entrar
history,
ahí y
I can
nuestra
go
mirada de
in
aquí hablo
in
a
our
título, digamos,
outlook.
personal de SURA. No puedo hablar por la
Personally, in
industria, pero
SURA, I
puedo hablar
cannot
por
speak about
SURA.
the whole industry, but I
Sí
can
es
speak
una
for SURA.
aproximación de
We
decir
do
yo quiero
have an
estar
approach
ahí
of
desde el
saying, I want to
comienzo
be
porque
there
quiero
from the
aprender.
beginning because I want to
El año
learn.
pasado
Last year,
inició el primer piloto
we
de un
started the
vehículo
first
autónomo de
pilot of an
carácter
autonomous
público en
vehicle, a
Santiago
public
de Chile,
autonomous
en uno de los
vehicle
países
in
en los que
Santiago de
nosotros
Chile, in one of
tenemos
the countries
operación.
where we
Es un
have
piloto, es
operations.
una
It is a
prueba, no
pilot
sabemos
test.
nada, nunca
It is
hemos
experimental.
asegurado
We know
uno,
nothing. We've
nunca
never
nada, pero sabemos
insured
que ahí
one
tenemos que
at all.
estar y que
But we
estar
know that we
ahí
need
es
to be there,
aprender
and being
para
there is
poder, digamos,
learning
ser
in order to
partícipes
be
como de la
able to
construcción de ese camino y ahí
participate in
estamos y hemos
paving
estado
that
siendo
road. We've been
parte
there, we will be
de ese
there, being
piloto y ese
part of that
aprendizaje.
pilot
Entonces,
and this
estoy completamente de
learning.
acuerdo
So
con lo que
I
Alejo
totally
dice,
agree with what
solamente
Alejo is saying,
complementar
and I
que
just
es un
want to
poco el
elaborate
eterno
on
dilema
that,
si
that it is
primero es el
about
huevo o la
the
gallina. Para
ongoing
nosotros es
dilemma,
más
or
que
whether it's the hen or the egg
respondernos
first.
esa
But
pregunta es
for us,
pararnos
more than
desde
answering
una
this question
posición que
is
queremos
about
estar
being
desde
in
el
a
primer
position
momento,
where we
porque
want to
aunque
be there
suene muy
from the
futurista
get-go.
todavía para
And
algunos
even though
el
it sounds
pensar en que
might futuristic for some to think that they are going to be transported airborne. We know it's going to happen, and we know that we will have to be there, and we want to be there from the start. Felipe?
Please, yes, of course.
Felipe.
Continúa, sí, claro.
Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
A ver, yo tuve la experiencia desde los años
Yes, I have had an experience
80
since
prácticamente
the 80s,
de traer a
basically,
Colombia
of bringing to Colombia
cushion vehicles,
a
hovercraft,
cushion vehicle,
aeroplanes
overcraft,
de varias partes del mundo,
from
Nueva
many different
Zelanda,
areas of the world,
Estados
from New
Unidos,
Zealand, from the
eh,
US,
Rusia,
Russia,
y bueno, mientras
and
el vehículo
while
tenga una
the vehicle
clasificación
is
internacional
classified and has an
aeronáutica,
international classification
el
by
proceso de
the
aseguramiento como
aviation
como
authorities, the
primera
insurance
vez, mi primera
process,
experiencia
even though it's the
en los
first
tipos, ha sido
experience in this type of
muy
vehicles, I
fácil.
mean, it
Esa es la
has been very
experiencia que llevo
easy.
toda la vida
That's the
con ese
experience
tipo de
that I
seguros. O
have
sea,
had my whole
yo
life
creo
with this
que es
type
al
of insurance
fabricante
policies.
a
I
quien
mean, it
le
is mostly the
corresponde
OEM
hacer todas
that
las
has the
pruebas
job of
necesarias
doing all
y
of the
todos los
necessary testing,
márgenes
all
de
of
riesgo,
the
de
risk
operación, para que
margins
luego se
of
vuelva
operations
absolutamente
for
de
it to
rutina
become
la parte
something
segura.
rudimentary for the insurance side of it.
Mientras uno siga los
I mean,
manuales de
while
operaciones
you follow
que se
the
conozcan
operations
los manuales
manuals,
de
the
operaciones
operation manuals are known,
y los rangos de operación,
and the ranges of
no hay dificultad.
operations, I don't foresee any
Hasta en algunos
difficulties.
casos me ha
I
tocado a
mean, even in
mí
some
hacer
cases, I
manuales
have
de
had to
operación
produce myself the
especificados
operation
en
manuals
cronómetro civil
and bringing them
cuando no
to
los
the
había.
Civil Aviation Authority when they didn't have
Una vez que
them
uno cumple esos
before. And with
requisitos,
that, you actually
se vuelve
meet the
rutinario.
requirements and it just becomes
O sea,
ordinary. I
lo que
mean,
menos me preocupa a mí es el
what I'm
conocimiento.
less concerned about is actually the
Para eso
insurance
está SURA.
matter for those
Aunque tenga alguna
devices.
experiencia, además,
Because there's
en modelos
actually some
reducidos, en modelos a
experience
escala.
in
O
smaller
sea que
models
no
or
es algo
scaled
nuevo,
models. I mean,
es
it's
algo
not
que lleva
something new.
mucho
It's
tiempo
something that has been
hablándose
ongoing for quite a
y
while. We've been
haciéndose.
speaking about it and we've been doing for quite a while.
Y hay ciudades en el mundo
And there are
que ya tienen
cities around the world that
operaciones
already have
tripuladas,
operations that
semimortaladas,
are
no tripuladas,
manned, unmanned,
con ese tipo de aparatos.
with this type of devices already.
Well, that's I appreciate that point of view because we certainly hope that we can achieve having a simplistic approach towards insurance. The truth is that with urban air mobility, in fact, we are developing those requirements. We are developing those new integration architectures. We are developing everything from the operation manuals of the aircraft together with OEMs and working together with all the subsystems providers, all the way to the design of the actual vertiports and the services that we need to provide. So it turns out that it's not only about the air vehicles, it's about how we integrate the air vehicles and the subsystems and everything else into one system. And like Andrew was referring to before, urban air mobility is a system of systems. And I think, and that's our perspective in Varon vehicles, like Lorena was saying, that's why it's so critically important to go hand in hand, not only with all the players that we are handshaking from the beginning, but also with insurance partners as we develop all these systems, all these requirements, all these parameters, so that we walk that learning curve together with insurance companies from the start. So I don't know if anybody has any comments on that point, which I think is it's very important. JR?
Y yo,
And
Go
Lorena?
ahead,
yo
Lorena.
tengo un
Yes,
comentario.
I have
Reitero que
a
estoy de acuerdo
comment, and
con
I
el punto de
reiterate that I
vista de
do agree
Jean-Claude de que
with
el
Jean-Claude's
aseguramiento de los aparatos en sí
standpoint
es
that insurance
probablemente el
for the
punto más simple de
devices
todos,
themselves is
pero
the
yo creo que la
easiest part of
pregunta
all of
acá
it,
tiene
yes.
que ir
But I
mucho
think
más
that the
allá
question here has to
y
go
es
beyond
cómo
that,
desde
and
nuestro
it is
rol de
about how, from
aseguramiento
our role of insurance
acompañamos la
companies,
adopción de este
we
tipo de
can
movilidad
assist
y por qué
the
no
adoption of this
decir
type of
podemos
mobility, and why
inclusive
not maybe even
acelerarla
try
porque se trata
to
de más una
accelerate,
percepción. Es
because it
decir,
is a
yo creo que
matter
el
of
interés de las
perception. I mean,
personas alrededor del
basically the
aseguramiento,
interest of
más
people
que
around
saber que alguien les va a
insurance,
pagar
more
cuando
than
algo
knowing that
catastrófico y
somebody's going to
negativo
pay them
ocurra,
when
la
something
pregunta
negative or
permanente que nosotros
catastrophic
nos hacemos
happens,
es
the
cómo podemos
question that
hacer
we
que sí
ask
hagan uso
ourselves
de
is
él desde
how
una
can
percepción
we
positiva.
make sure that they use it from a
Jean-Claude
positive
seguramente lo sabe porque está en la
perception.
industria, que la
Jean-Claude most likely
probabilidad
knows this
de
because he's in
tener
the
un
industry,
accidente en un
that the
avión es
likelihood
n
of
veces
having an
menor que la
accident
probabilidad de
on an
tener un
airplane
airplane is much lesser than having a car accident, a car crash. However, within the perception, people overall are more afraid about hopping on an airplane than
Lo
hopping on a
único
car
más
on a daily
seguro
basis.
del
The only
avión
thing
es el
that is
ascensor.
safer than the plane is the elevator. Yes, that's right, I agree. So that's why it is a matter of perception, like I said, and yeah, you're right in the fact that the insurance for the devices is going to be the easiest part. But how can we work, or is that going to be enough for people to adopt the system and want to use it, or what else shall we do and make sure so that there is openness by the end users to use it
Eso
and
ya
to
es el
adopt this
papel de
type of
ellos.
mobility? That
O
that
sea,
would be our
la,
job, I guess. I mean,
campesinos, mientras se
as far as
sepa en la
insurance
lógica de
goes,
gas seguro cuáles son las
as long as you
condiciones,
know what are the
dónde funciona,
conditions,
cuáles
how
son las
is it
certificaciones que
operating, what are the
piden,
certifications that are
digamos que
required.
es relativamente
Let's just say that this is
rutina.
relatively
Yo tuve
routinary,
el
so
mismo
to
problema
speak.
con vehículos
I had the
anfibios
same issues with
y digamos que
amphibian
son
vehicles,
temas que se resuelven.
and these are
Lo he
matters that
tenido con
are actually
submarinos,
solved. I have had the
submarinos
same
turísticos
issue with
de
submarines,
vanguardia, los
touristic
he traído a
submarines that
Colombia.
are state of the art that I
El
brought
único
to
problema que
Colombia. And the only
teníamos,
issue that we had,
usted no me va a creer, mi
you're not going to
experiencia en
believe
el
me,
tema de
but
submarinos
my
fue el
experience in
momento en
terms
el
of
cual
submarines was
la grúa
the moment where the
entregaba
crane would
el
actually
submarino
deliver the
al agua
submarine into the
y
water
lograr asegurar
to
este momento
accomplish,
de algunos
to
segundos fue lo más
ensure
complicado
this few
en la
seconds
parte de
moment was the
seguridad.
most complicated
¿Por
part
qué? O sea, a veces
in terms
surge el
of
problema donde uno
safety. And
menos
sometimes the
lo piensa.
problem comes up
La
where you
parte
least
que el dron,
think it will
la
arise.
gente suba en
As
él.
far as the people
A ver,
hopping onto
las
the
alas deltas,
aircrafts, I mean,
los
the delta
ultralivianos,
wings, the
que son
aeroplanes,
mucho más peligrosos que
which
los
are
drones,
much more dangerous than the drones,
han tenido aceptación,
have had
han
acceptance,
tenido éxito en
have had
Colombia.
success
Y
in
mientras estuvieron
Colombia, and
autorizados.
while
Y
they
la gente
were
volaba,
authorized, and
volaba
people
en
were
un ultraliviano.
flying ultralight
Digamos que
airplanes,
los colombianos somos muy
and
dados
Colombians, let's say, are
a
very
la,
prone
a la novelería.
to novelty,
Yo
right?
recuerdo
I recall
haberme llevado en San
having
Andrés una
taken
primera
to San
dama
Andres a
perseguida
first
por todos
lady
sus
that
guardaespaldas
was being chased by all of
por
her
tierra en un
bodyguards
ultraliviano
in an
bastante
ultralight
oxidado y que
plane
no
that
creo que
was
hubiera ofrecido
quite
pues
rusted. And I
seguridad
really don't
excelente.
believe that all
Y
the
bueno, la
safety
gente
features
vuela,
were necessarily there.
eso
People
inspira
fly, that's
confianza.
just it.
Yo creo
It
que
just
es
inspires
una labor de
trust. I
mercadeo
believe that is
y creo
most
que
about
serán y
marketing, and I
son
believe
aparatos
that these are and will
extremadamente
be
seguros,
extremely safe
relativamente
devices,
muy silenciosos,
relatively speaking, very
muy
silent,
estables
very
y la gente
stable,
está acostumbrada
and
a
people
ver
are
los
used to seeing
drones
drones
volar
already.
con
Drones
éxito,
fly
como
successfully
juguetes,
as
como
toys,
modelos reducidos,
as
como
reduced
medios de transporte de
models,
carga.
as
Entonces ya hay
cargo
bastante
transportation means.
antecedentes y
So there's a
precedentes
lot
al
of
respecto
precedent and a
como
lot
para
of
pensar que
background on
sea
the
una
matter
operación
to think that this
muy
will be an
exitosa,
operation that will
agradable
be
y
quite
realmente lo
successful,
veo
pleasant,
como
and I actually see this
eso
as
lleva
I
años,
mean,
años y años
that this has been
diciéndose
ongoing
como
for
el
years and
transporte del
years and
futuro,
years as the future method
por
of
todas las
transport.
facilidades
I mean,
que eso
because all of
trae desde, o
the
sea, el tema
possibilities that
del
it brings. I
despegue
mean, the
vertical es un
vertical
tema
takeoff is
desde los
something
autogiros españoles
that
de los años
from
40,
the Spanish in the 40s has
podemos
already
decir
been
antes, se
discussed.
está trabajando
It's
en
something
este tema.
that we've already been working on around this
Y es
matter.
el vehículo que Colombia necesita,
And it is the vehicle that Colombia needs,
país
actually.
donde
So
A
I
country.
challenge one element of that, and that is that we don't currently have autonomy. with aircraft. We have a pilot, and a pilot actually adds a huge element of resilience to any operation. When something goes bad, a human has, they feel in control when there's another person who's trained and certified and is in control of that vehicle. You know, an engine goes out, but there's still a pilot that's trying to get it on the ground. I think the public perception of machines controlling these things and not having a pilot and having that autonomy, I think does change that paradigm a little bit.
JR, I think you wanted to jump into that as well.
That's a great point on that side, Andrew. And what we're really working on is in the communication and connection with the public is the difference between the highly automated, which we see in conventional commercial aviation today, to that of autonomy. And we know that time is going to take a while before that gap is jumped or fully embraced. And so it's not only working with the public, but then also really going back to Lorena's point, and Felipe yourself as well, this is an invitation to learn in these new innovative areas. We're trying to hold a space for that ecosystem so that the experts in their own areas can really lean in and start that learning process with us. It's not going to be just the insurance companies, just the infrastructure, just the operators that are going to come up with these solutions. It has to be that stepping into that safe space and willingness to learn alongside. So that's a great summary that you were talking about, Felipe, on starting these conversations early and really walking through that learning process.
Absolutely, and that's why we feel so strongly about leading an ecosystem because of that reason, JR. Let's use these final minutes of that are remaining on this very interesting think tank to talk about the coverage of the non-users and the not the part of the operation. Those third-party coverage that we need to produce, and coverage of those non-users. So we're going to be occupying the airspace over a city and parts of those airspaces, of course. So we're intending to be flying over communities. Probably, as we have been talking before in other think tanks, we may want to design these urban geodesics and thus those virtual lanes over certain areas of preference. For example, existing roads, existing railroads, and some other areas. But in the end, we're going to need to fly over the cities where we are occupying spaces of communities. And a huge part of acceptance is not only the user's acceptance, which we have addressed in this talk so far, but it's also acceptance of the non-users, the communities, the people who are going to have to, we're going to have to convince to adopt our system, even though they're not users. So why don't we talk about that, those coverages, third-party coverages, liabilities, and so on. Does anybody want to jump into those? For example, Jean-Claude, from your point of view, there's hotels. When we implement a vertiport at a hotel, how does that existing infrastructure, those non-users at a hotel complex, how do we approach the insurance part of that aspect of our operation? So to anybody, over to that point. Why don't we jump to JR then? Go ahead.
I can start us off, and just to summarize that point exactly, as we not only are talking about, and I know Maria in the chat mentioned this as well, we're really focusing on those connection pieces so that if you are a user or if you are part of the community, there has to be that perceived value of how this technology can directly benefit you. If you're only witnessing the negatives of this, such as the noise and visual pollution, there's going to be a stiff and growing resistance for the technology as it tries to expand outward. So the words we're trying to use in Canada to really lean into that gap are ensuring that this technology moves society forward in a positive step through accessibility, equitability, inclusiveness, that zero emission aviation aspect, and also safety entwined within that. So I'll start off with that point on just really having that foundational framework and where we're building upon those conversations.
Who wants to touch on those?
Si quiere, es Felipe también, y precisamente me uno a lo que acaba de decir ya, en un sentido de darle incluso potencia
talk about giving power to what could be seen not only as the risk, but a possible invasion of space in terms of what belongs to the people, which is the city. And the other way around, I'm going to take the possible positive example of the infrastructure of the Medellin Metro, which were the cement and the pylons that were put together in order to build the line through which the different vehicles go through. It is somewhat today the social cultural meeting point around there's a development of different leisure spaces or connection with other transport methods, commercial areas. I believe that this is also part of the social responsibility outlook to see how around each one of these connection points first we accomplish a positive impact so that people feel that they have a sense of belonging and they take ownership of the infrastructure. And this is the same for urban transport, where people think and see it as their own and looking out after it to incentivize the use as well. And looked at from the insurance standpoint, and Lore said this a few times, that the perceived risk in terms of the possibility of one of these aircrafts crashing on top of a house or an emergency landing has to be incorporated and it has to be considered. And it's important coverage, but beyond that, in terms of the perception, it's important to recognize that the feeling of benefit is much greater than the risk that has a positive impact.
Gracias, Felipe. A ver, yo creo que
Thank you very much, Felipe. I think it's worthwhile in terms of what Lorena was saying about creating a market for those vehicles. It's worthwhile to say that in Colombia, for helicopter transport within the cities towards the airports, I've had two experiences, one in Bogota and one in Medellin, at rates that are, I mean, extremely competitive. A taxi car is in Medellin is 85,000 pesos for transport between the Olaya Herrera Airport and Rio Negro. And charging 125,000 pesos, just a little bit more. We haven't been successful in Medellin. We haven't been successful in Bogota with helicopters, and we haven't been successful. There's no culture of the helicopter in Colombia for the transport of passengers, and there's fear in Colombia towards helicopter transport, which is something that doesn't happen in Sao Paulo. In Sao Paulo, you have 400 helicopters flying at the same time in the city, and in Colombia, we haven't been able to accomplish that yet. I believe that those vehicles, electric vehicles of vertical takeoff, will be more successful than the helicopters in Colombia. There's a lot of negative connotation due to the series of crashes that there have been in helicopters. I mean, even the presidential helicopter has crashed a few times. So I believe that there is a lot of likelihood of success, more than with the helicopters with these new vehicles.
We're really keen on that point as well, Jean-Claude, because it is the new types of air vehicles, the new generation of vertical takeoff and landing air vehicles, and especially the electric version of those, that we feel are going to be the enabling pieces of the new urban air mobility in the world. So yeah, that's great. Adriana, why don't we send it over to you for a couple questions we have there?
Yes, I have a question from Maria Tarabanovska. She's saying that she agrees that it's not only about insuring vehicles, but people should also be included in the equation. Potentially insuring the passengers and the pilot will certainly help improve public acceptance. But how do we ensure that we are not giving access to the vehicles to those wishing to harm their surroundings on both on board and outside the in the air. How do we make sure that we don't insure someone who will try and take over the control and lead to operations that will cause accidents and destructions?
So those are two great questions from Maria. Two-part question actually. Probably Andrew, to you on the systems part. How do you feel we can approach safety? And whoever else wants to answer the more broad question on ensuring occupants and outsides. Andrew?
Yeah, I think from a safety perspective, how the machine authorizes users. Once you get to more of these highly automated or autonomous systems, there's probably not going to be a steering wheel that someone can grab on and just turn, right? Or if there's no pilot, you may have to do, multiple layer authentication, right? You need fingerprint, passwords, something that it's not just a matter of, turning it into a building. You're going to have to be an authorized operator of that vehicle. So I think there's a technology, a kind of a low barrier there for technology. I think it's potentially harder if somebody wants to dismantle. There's other things that you could do internal to a system like that when there's no one there to stop you that are potentially harmful. But I think from just somebody getting behind the wheel of one of these things and flying it where they want to go, I think that's a fairly easy problem to solve.
Okay, JR?
I'll just have the one-liner in that second more general part. So thanks, Maria, for the question. But really leaning into the experts around the world, tapping into the cybersecurity side, there's going to be a beautiful overlap on taking those problems and solutions and applying it to the next autonomy and, of course, in the safety aspect.
Okay, anybody probably from SURA want to jump in to close some closing remarks regarding Maria's question on the mix of, ensuring both the vehicles and the outsiders of our operation? Lorena?
No, pues creo que es un poco recoger lo que hemos dicho. Para nosotros la mirada tiene que ir más allá de los vehículos. Hay que ponerle mucho zoom a las personas, a lo que realmente va a pasar con las personas acá y cómo las aseguramos a ellas. Y este riesgo que María menciona, pienso que no es un riesgo particular de este tipo de movilidad.
Big risk of this type of mobility. In a way, we can say that we're talking about vandalism that doesn't just happen at the IT level, but it is not exclusive here, just as we take care of it in a different type of context or situation. We should find a way to find those protocols that will allow us to minimize it and to see a way for this type of mobility to operate. I don't know if Alejo wants to say something else. That's exactly it, Lore. Something else that I'd like to add now that we're talking about what we could before be calling science fiction for those that have been viewers of the Black Mirror series. We're not really too far away of the connections in terms of the information of the people in different realms of our mobility that become inputs for us to detect patterns of possible behavior. As Maria mentioned, we almost are able to guess who wants to cause harm to others in a transportation mean, regardless whether it's this one or not, or at any other like a metro, a subway, or an airplane. That is a risk today that we're exposed to already, and that the information component of the people, as we said right now, the data that opens the door for connections with different parts of the ecosystems will be the input and the social media, the participation within different forums, and even the cyber history becomes an additional input that might actually become a way to identify the possible risks on this scenario. And that's what I believe, and I want to second what has already been stated.
It's certainly a part of the integration efforts when we talk about the design of the vertiports and all the systems on board the aircraft, and how to manage and operate and orchestrate all the traffic and the operation in the air and on the ground. Certainly, it's going to be technology intensive. Certainly, we're going to see a merger of technologies happening in all these components of urban mobility. And that sort of matches the intention of integrating mobility modes, as we were talking before so many times. As we integrate different modes of transportation and urban air mobility into those modes, we are going to see an integration into different technologies as well, very intensive in terms of security, probably tracking, and in the end, as Andrew was saying at the beginning, very data intensive. So I wish we had more time. These think tanks are always proving to be a bit short for such interesting topics that we touch. I really wanted to close this think tank by saying that we are indeed on the verge of a new era in our cities. As we shape the future cities and the future mobility, we are definitely entering, probably, as some people have said before, a new Wright's brother era, a new Wright's brother moment in time. And that is, to what Jean-Claude was saying, a new perspective for our future applications of all different modes of transportation, where we indeed play a very important role with urban air mobility, and in general, as JR was saying, with advanced air mobility. It's certainly a moment for innovation on the insurance side. It's an opportunity for business and new business creation. And that's why we're seeing such a positive traction from players like SURA, and that's really, really important from an early stage. We're definitely all building urban air mobility as we speak. Not all the cards have been played. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to generate, parameters, regulations, air vehicles, how we're going to integrate them into the airspace. And all these rules are being built right now. So with all that, the main focus, the main target in the end, it's probably the holy grail of urban air mobility. And that is acceptance. Acceptance. As we try to achieve acceptance from the adopters, early adopters, and eventual air taxi users, acceptance from aeronautics regulators, from ground urban planners and ground regulators, from communities in general. That is the main goal we're trying to achieve, and probably the biggest barrier in urban air mobility today. So with that, I want to thank all of you guys for participating in this very interesting think tank about insurance, how we're going to innovate on that. And I wanted to wish all of you a great rest of your day by inviting you to our next think tank. Next week is going to be on the 8th of October, our think tank number 7, which is going to focus on the value of Latin America for air vehicle OEMs. So with that, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye to all.
Gracias.